This. Okay.
So
You're recording. Yeah.
over the last 3 weeks,
Yep. Let me try to share.
you have done a great analysis of my MVP data at quarterback, running back, and wide receiver. Today, we're going to look at tight ends. I'm so excited to see this data. I'm almost afraid to look at my screen right now.
Okay.
But to catch
Yeah.
people up
Yeah.
before we
Yeah.
let
Go
you
ahead.
talk,
Yeah.
my MVP data combines the three most important things that can happen in fantasy football and looks at them weekly. Fantasy football is a weekly sport. We need more tools in our fantasy football playbook, in our toolbox, that are weekly tools. MVP looks at guys who are better than the historic median. It gives them a bonus if they are huge point game producer any given week, looks at their percentage of doing that, and then it subtracts points for the truly lousy games. Now, tight end, of course, would have a different historical median in production than running back and wide receiver. But because we select our flex player from that bigger pool, I look at the tight ends and compare them to a historic median for running backs and wide receivers. So the scores on MVP will be much lower for tight ends, but the elite tight ends will stand out in the crowd and also be comparable to those other positions when we're looking at the flex position. So, Professor, you looked at this data.
Yep.
What
Yep.
say you on the effectiveness
Okay.
of using MVP and tight end? Because weekly values
Yep.
didn't do as well at tight end than other positions.
Yeah. So to recap last year's research that you can find, the weekly values for quarterbacks and running backs were superior to the total points, and I think I even did points per game. They were better. I think I measured that by failures. I actually looked at the results and found where it just absolutely cost you big time. And we saw less failures with your system, the weekly values, quarterbacks and running backs, and wide receivers and tight ends were the same level of success. So you didn't lose anything, didn't gain as much as we hoped. So it's, I'm not going to fool people and say, oh, this works everywhere all the time. No. If you know about horse racing, some are good on the grass, some are good on all weather, some are good on dirt, mudders, and muddy tracks and fast track. I mean, things are athletes. We are biology. We're a result of evolution, and there are different ways to be successful. And that's I think the overall thing to take home. But using horse racing, anytime you have a situation where you look at things different and you're better, QBs and RBs, or the same, you probably got an advantage because you're looking at different things in a different way. So even though success wise it's not, but you have an advantage. If everybody's looking over here and you're looking a little different, you're probably going to catch things, and it's the impact value will be better even if it's the same level, as long as you're doing something different. And that's at the racetrack, that's wherever, any kind of gambling that's involves thinking. So it's not fixed odds, but poker. And in other words, if you can win poker by, I don't know, body language, and that's how you play, not understanding, I have two jacks left in the deck, and therefore I have, mathematically I should do this and that. No, if you can do body language and do just as good as the math whiz, then you've got an advantage, because when they're doing one thing, your body language may be telling you something else. So you're zigging and zagging differently. You may end up the same level of success, but you have an opportunity. So that's my overall take, Dennis, for this whole thing. And then here's their tight end data. So this is the chart you gave me. And this was in an article that you published about fantasy scoring. Was it down in 2023? And you did your MVP as a way to carry your message. They should all, everybody listening should go look at that article. But this is the table. I did some colorization, try to make it look pretty. Okay, put a bow on it, make it look pretty for you. And so it's out there on the scienceoffantasyfootball.com. And we are recording, visually recording today, video recording. So people will get to see this lesson plan with you and I talking, and of course the podcast. And so we're at tight ends. You should look at the other lesson plans and podcasts for QB, RB, and WRs. Tight ends, the MVP. You're right. Your numbers are really low compared to the others, and you said why. The high, the low, players that were above 100 MVP, 75, 50, 25, and played 10 complete games. So why don't you remind us about that complete game business? Because I think that makes it even more better. I think that's butter on the bread there with the complete games concept.
Yeah, and what I don't care about in fantasy football as much as everybody else is injuries. Okay, injuries are going to happen, and in a 17-game season, we're starting to see
Oh yeah.
guys sit out when there's a quick turns. You're not seeing 17-game seasons, and year-end points just tell us who stayed healthy and who played the most games. So when I look at fantasy football, I look at full games played, and for the tight end position, I have a pretty high standard for that because I say I want somebody who was on the field for 50% or more of his team's snaps. And those are the games that I count. Plus, I look at the games where, a guy was 40%, but he had a good scoring game. I don't remove that data. So, if anything, I'm giving the benefit of the doubt to guys that fall short, but I'm not penalizing them with a game where they only played 20, 25% of the snaps. So the MVP data can be a little bit misleading at tight end because there's a lot of teams running 2 and 3 tight end sets. And if a guy is a great red zone target, his MVP is going to be a little higher than you might think. But that's okay because he earned it by being a great red zone target. But I look at 10 or more full games before I will count anybody's MVP score. And that's why the number is at 32, even though we've got, for 2023. And that number has stayed pretty constant.
It's pretty good, except for 2018, it was 25. That was a sad year, wasn't it, Dennis? What was going on?
It was a very sad year, and I'm not sure why.
Yeah.
Was it an injury thing? I don't
Maybe.
know. I'd have to dive deeper into that. Was it just one of those deals where there really weren't that many great, or there weren't that many good tight ends under the great list of tight ends? So you had just fewer guys. You got guys that were coming and going in and out of the lineup. They were trying different options because nothing was successful. And that might be why that number was low. You notice what other number was low was in COVID year of 2020. That was only 29. But otherwise, if you remove those big numbers out of there, the median is 32 over the last 6 years. And
we have folks that, if you're listening to podcasts, go look at the visual because you can see, or go read Dennis or articles. I actually do both. That's my homework assignment for you. And so we've got the median right down there at the bottom for you to showcase as well.
And we could see that at every level, there really was tight to the median. last season.
It was. It's
It was
been
incredibly tight.
almost every year except the
Yes.
2020 and 2018. Yeah.
Yeah, just a few outlying years. But when it comes to every level, even the over 100, over 75, over 50, over 25, and over 10 games played, the numbers have not really fluctuated
So
that
Dennis,
much.
when it just this question just hits me. Usually, with the other positions, 75 is kind of that magic level.
Oh yeah.
Are we talking 50 here for tight ends?
For tight ends, yeah, we have to go down all the way to 50
Mhm.
as starting tight ends in fantasy
Now,
football, which
obviously, you want the 100 guy, right? Kelsey
yes.
or Andrews or whoever, Hawkinson, but if you got to fill somebody in, you'll take a 50 guy for a weekly play. People
Oh yeah.
forget that. And
Yeah,
if
and
and
yeah,
if
and
you've
what
got that, Dennis, just going back to my draft strategy, if I didn't get a good one, then I probably had to have two or three to shoehorn in and out, looking at my defense against position, Vegas, and all these other numbers. So I was streaming if I was down at the 50 level for your MVP, or if I had the Andrews, the Kell, and I was just playing him and taking what I got.
yeah, and what this data shows you is that if you missed getting one of those five guys that were
Yep.
over 75,
Yeah.
it didn't make any sense to do anything except for stream and grab those guys at the tail end of the draft.
Yeah.
There was no difference after that top five, as far as difference in your fantasy football league. But at running back, we had like usually 11 guys over 100,
I can
24
pull.
ish. Yeah, 24 ish
Let's see, where's the
over that.
here we go. Yeah, so
Yeah,
here's your
we
running
had
back data.
we had at least 11 over the 100. So all of our RB1s were similarly
You were
scaled.
catching your over 100 was catching
Yeah.
RB1s
Yeah.
and
And
some of the
RB,
high RB2s. Some.
correct. And some of the rest of the RB2s were picked up pretty much in that 75 and higher category. But
Yes,
if you look at tight end,
it's not that way at all. The
it's not that way at
distribution
all.
of the
And your
population
top guy is so much better
better.
than your fifth ranked guy.
Mhm.
This shows why the concept of an elite tight end on your fantasy team is a winning strategy, because the gap between the top guy and the fifth or sixth guy is much bigger at tight end than it is at any other position, and that's including quarterback. So for my money, this data shows that
Yes.
grabbing a tight end earlier than your league mates is a winning strategy.
So
And
so so did us the your analysis of the data shows. I'm definition. The data didn't show us anything. It's our
correct.
analysis of the data,
Yeah, the
right?
data didn't say
Yeah,
anything.
yeah, I
I
know,
am
but
saying things based on the
it's
data, but you're right.
it's your analysis. That's why two people can
Correct.
look at the same data, the 40 times and have two different conclusions, right? And
Correct.
now that you've told us that little sad tale, that waffle tail, I'm gonna call it instead of veggie tails. You have to let your kids. It's the waffle tails because that's the punishment. What's the Waffle House punishment? You got to sit in the Waffle House for 24 hours. So I don't like waffles that much, Dennis. I mean, no offense. They're
it,
okay,
it,
but yeah.
it
But
and
anyway, this is
and
very
here,
clear. Look at the 1
yeah.
versus the 8 or the 1. Look at 2022. You talk about in
Oh,
trouble. Look at you had one above 100 and one above 75. So does that mean there were two, or is it the same person? Everybody
it's the
sucked
same.
all.
Yeah, it's the same person. It's Travis
Wow,
Kelsey,
that is
and
suck e. So
yeah,
2022, you really sucked if you didn't
yeah,
have
and the
Kelsey.
reason the reason is most of the tight ends that would have been at that 75 or higher level didn't
Must
play
got
10 full
hurt or
games.
something. Yeah,
Yeah, they didn't
something
play
must.
10 full.
So that to me, when I see 2022, boy, that just I'm telling you, that makes you want to do the elite drafting even more, Dennis.
Yes.
Boy, again, folks, you need to have a strategy, and the data allows us to look at it, analyze it, and develop that strategy. And I
Eh,
think Dennis is telling us that he's an elite tight end drafter kind of guy, and that's probably been holding up for quite so many years here.
Yeah, and I think we're going to get back to a 2019 type year soon.
So
Okay.
top eight
So top, yeah, top,
that
top,
were that were you could play them every week. Dennis,
correct.
that
The
is
the
such an unusual situation. Are you
yes,
telling me we're going to have that?
we're going to grow a little bit at the tight end position.
We had
Be,
five last year. I mean,
correct. And
four,
we're for last year. Dalton
one the
Kincaid
year
is not in
before.
that group, so
Yeah.
he will be included in this group this year. A better quarterback in Atlanta, maybe Pitts
Yeah, they
is
got
in
rid of
that
John
group.
Smith today.
Correct. And
Not yeah.
maybe Brock Bowers becomes another one. So
Okay.
you're going to have this population grow. Maybe Noah Fant, who used to be in the plus 75 category when he was starting full time, if he leaves Seattle,
Uh-huh.
or if Seattle, with the change of coach, uses one tight end instead of all three,
Mhm.
maybe he is added to that over 75 group. So I think that population could grow as high as 6 or 7.
But still, Dennis, you're talking after the few are gone,
Oh yeah.
it's lean.
No, you
It's
don't want to
lean.
be you don't
Yeah.
want to be stuck at tight end. I believe that the
7.
strategy next year is you're going to still want that top 3 or 4 guy.
Yep.
Okay, because
That's what it looks like to me.
I still want to be edging towards getting the higher end of that 75 plus group.
Yep.
So I don't want to get stuck without. So I want to take a few before the last of the best one is gone. So
So
I don't
this
want to be at the tail end of the drop off.
yeah. So what I do when I track the ADP by position data that you and I talk about later in the season, we'll be able to tell folks, hey, about this draft round, maybe
Oh yeah.
round 4, 5, 6.
Yep.
You better have a plan if you want an early pick, right?
If
If you
you
miss on Kelsey, you better have a. In other words, you don't want to wake up at round 9 and look around saying who's left. You do not
yeah.
want. You want to be ahead of the game, not behind it, folks. And I'm telling you, tied in Dennis's data shows how critical it is. You just do not want to be the sucker at the table. You know, draft, round 8 or 9 or whatever. You just don't
And
want to do it.
no, and here's what I will say right now, as of
Okay.
March the 1st, when we're recording this,
Okay, you're gonna get bold here.
I I don't want, and I
Yeah,
haven't put these 3 in the exact order that I want them yet,
yeah,
but my list of elite tight ends, unless Hawkinson makes a miraculous recovery from injury,
yeah.
I don't think he'll be ready at the beginning of the season. If I'm wrong, we got plenty of time to figure that out. It's only March 1st. But if I
Gotcha.
was doing a draft today,
Yeah,
I would leave that draft in any format, whether it was tight end premium or not. I'm leaving that draft with either Kelsey, Andrews, or Laporta.
gotcha.
Nobody else. If I miss on those 3 guys, let's say I try to get it down to the 3rd or 4th round before I take one of those 3 and I miss,
Mhm.
then I'm drafting at the end of the bunch. I do not want to I'll grab 2 late
Yep,
and play the streaming game, because after those 3, again, assuming Hawkinson does not get ready to play on week 1, I'm probably punting the position because now I've lost at that position. I don't want to double down on a loss by wasting a draft pick on somebody way before their time. It's a similar strategy. Don't take a first round running back that isn't first round running back viable. Switch positions and get the best of the other position rather than the seventh best running back. Give me the second or third best wide receiver. That's the strategy you need to use at tight end as well. If I can't get the top three, I'm grabbing somebody else because I'm not going to take the fourth best tight end, who is probably Kittle right now. And Kittle, I could live with Kittle on my team, but I understand he's getting older and he usually misses some games. So I want the sureness, as much of sureness as you can get, as much of a guarantee as you can get in football, of Kelsey, Andrews, Laporta. That's it.
So I took your MVP, this next figure, and went and added total PPR points and the top tight end points for the year total. And last year we had 330. The year before, 374.
Wow.
And we know, big difference. Look at 2020, 437. That may have been Kelsey's best year. I think that was him.
Yeah.
And so still, we're talking 100 points difference between 2020 and 2023. So there's a lot of, I think that's telling us about variation. So in this figure, Dennis, I plot things looking across the years. And probably if you look at the trends, it's kind of a roller coaster, but the numbers compared to each other, the max, that hasn't changed a lot. There's been some highs and lows, but your MVP definitely shows a lot more probably variation than the other positions. And when I scale this to the 100%, big difference on the scale factor, Dennis. Look at your MVP from 0 to 100. 2022 was 0. 2020 was 100. Last year was 36. So not only do we have lots of variation, but you don't have many tight ends that are worthy of early rounds. So you've got two factors that are just driving this elite quarterback business. And when you plot the scale version, Dennis, it gets look at the highs and the lows for
It's
your
a heck
MVP.
of a roller coaster.
Look at that. So that tells me, so your MVP is showing us something that I think the total points maybe not showing us as much. You are emphasizing the variation, I think, a lot more. If and you're going to love this figure, this one you've been waiting for. If we ask the question about variation, here's your tight end in blue MVP. Look at the variation versus total points and max. Folks, no other position shows anything this dramatic. Tight ends are like something like from the moon or something. And so they should not be thought of as just, oh, I'll just draft somebody. My argument, based on Dennis's showing us this extreme variation and the extreme eliteness, I think you're going to put a lot of time in if you miss that top. So your plan for drafting 2024 needs to be deeper than, if I miss Kelsey, what do I do now? And you better know the answer to that question. You should not be a six-pack under, start flicking your sheets around and flipping coins or whatever it is you're doing, drafting. You better know beforehand what bullets are in your gun for tight end, and you better have them figured out, because most likely there's going to be somebody jumping Kelsey early, or whoever, Andrew, whoever it is, they're going to be jumping earlier than we want. And you better figure out of the next 3, 4, 5 or so who you want, and just don't be waking up in round 9 saying, "What do I do now?" Because if you're waking up at round 9, and if you don't have a good tight end, you're probably losing 5, 10 points a week, folks. That's hard to make up. A lot of people, "Oh, I'll do it." Well, then you must be better than me, because I struggle every week trying to put the best lineup I can together, and it's tough. So, Dennis, there's the variation, and let's review now. This is all of the MVP total points and max points variation by position. This one figure, uh, boy, is there a big look at tight ends. They are so much different. So quarterback, the best actually with your MVP, Dennis, are running backs. You're really
Oh yeah.
tight on
Yeah.
quarterbacks next, wide receivers probably next, and then tight ends are like something completely different. It's like you're hunting squirrel, and all of a sudden there's a wild pig there. So what is this? It's not in the tree. How do I deal with this? That's what tight ends
And
are.
and,
There's
and
something
so
completely
here's my so I got a couple of takeaways from this
okay.
data.
Okay.
The first and most important takeaway is I have a doubt. I have some concern that I might have made a mistake in the 2022 database. So I'm going to go back and
Okay. Well,
I'm going to
I
quality
can whip this.
control.
Yeah, let's
Yeah,
go.
I'm going to quality control that data because I'm concerned because when one thing is so drastically different than the
It's
other,
so drastically different,
it,
Dennis.
it, you have to eliminate whether it was a mistake or not.
Yeah,
If you see a piece of data that is an outlier,
it
and
is.
it is
It's
and
something different.
it's an outlier because it is an outlier,
I mean,
not
look at the
because it's a
total
data
points.
mistake.
Look at the
Oh yeah.
variation. It's
Oh yeah.
almost the same. A little bit higher
Yeah.
with wide receivers. The
Yeah.
max has a lot of variation. Probably that's understandable. You're talking one player every year. So,
So so the second takeaway is while the methodology makes sense of grading them on the same scale
I'm
as
wondering if
running
that,
backs
yeah.
and wide receivers,
Mhm.
I wonder if we're missing something in the comparison at the position. When we look at the data tells us don't start a tight end in your flex position. That's what it
Definitely.
tells us. Okay.
Yes.
But I'm wondering, we already knew that. Unless you've got a team with Kelsey and Andrews or Kelsey and Laporta. Now I do have a team with Laporta and Kincaid and Ingram. So, dynasty teams, you can just happen to accumulate a wealth of data at a position. And in
Right.
that situation, I don't have a problem playing one of those other elite. I don't have a problem with playing two elite guys at
Yeah.
tight end in my flex position. But is this MVP data, is it going to pick us the best next tier guys after those elite? And with the variability in here, the answer is no.
Yeah.
The answer is this data is not useful at all after you have identified that elite group. Once that elite group is identified, and we really didn't need MVP to tell us that Kelsey, Laporta, and Andrews were the best of the breed, and Hawkinson when he's healthy. We knew that
And
already.
look
So
at the
this,
distance of the top whisker with tight ends
yeah,
as well.
yeah,
There's
it's
some
it's
really different things happening.
correct. So the question is, should we recalibrate tight end so we know who the next best, so we know who the fourth through eighth best tight ends are? Because MVP is not giving us a clear understanding of that, because it's telling us that after the top three tight ends, that the rest of them suck when they're compared to wide receivers and running backs. That's what it tells us.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do two things with this data. First, I'm going to check my year's data and make sure that the highs and lows are valid. I'm going to recalibrate and do another analysis of the tight end position using figures that represent the historic mean at just that position and see if the ratings are any different. Now, I can't compare them to wide receivers and tight ends after I do that, but I already know that I don't like the tight ends. I don't like the fourth best tight end over anybody at wide receiver that's in the top 36. The data tells me that already. I don't need another confirmation of that. I know it. I'm not going to play Jonnu Smith over even Tyler Boyd in my flex. Not doing it because I know the opportunities aren't there to catch a ball and to score points. So I'll recalibrate MVP and see if it does a better job of picking up that second tier of tight ends because it doesn't right now.
So the last four figures, just this is something I like to do. Is this is what I call sector distribution. I looked at the different your numbers, and I did the same color. You could look at the 100, and we can compare, the scaling and the numbers from 2018 to 23 for quarterbacks. The 75 is in blue, and then the 25 and the 50.
Wow.
Yeah, so it looks to me, I think there's some stuff that we need to think about here. I haven't 100% figured all this out yet, but take a look at like WRs.
Wow.
Look at it's different than the quarterbacks and look at the RBs. The 100 is around the 15%, and if you scale it, the quarterbacks, there's not many of them. In other words, they're rarer in the numbers of the quarterbacks. Not a lot of elite quarterbacks. There's a lot more elite running backs. Getting lean on WRs, and look at tight ends, almost nobody, Dennis. So
Yeah.
I think these data can give you some idea about the population distribution. That's why I did these graphs here, Dennis. So I'm going to put all this out for people to look at. But look how close the 75 and the 100 are for tight ends versus
Wow.
wide receiver. Look at the difference. Look at the distance.
There's a definite RB1, RB2, WR1,
Yes,
WR2.
this is what it's telling
Yeah.
us. Notice the quarterbacks recently was a lot closer in the middle years, the COVID 21, 20, and then last year was
Yep.
really different. Look at 2018, really different. So you can take that quarterbacks have some interesting things happening that people could get tricked on. In other words, it's maybe less predictable. How do we get a 2018 or 2023 difference? The elites are ruling. There's not and but RBs it's pretty flat.
Yeah,
And the
I think we're seeing the population at RB and wide receiver that is very predictable. Okay.
I
The
think the
names,
prediction, this is what this is telling us. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I think the predictions are a little easier to make to stratify those groups.
And look at
Where
the distance from the 75 to the 50 and the 25 with the tight ends. It's so big, so big.
yeah.
And there's a little bit, like I said, something going on in the top sectors of the quarterbacks, Dennis, that is different. In other words, it's not been the same. the last 18 to 23. In other words, it
But what
hasn't been business as usual, Dennis. This is a
no,
warning that something's been going on the last couple years, that the preceding three was different, but 2018 was a lot like 2023.
and I think what it's telling us is that if you are in a super flex league and you've got a quarterback in either of those first two groups, those first two populations, if you have two quarterbacks in that population,
You're probably
you're
good.
competitive. You're
Yeah.
competitive. And I don't care if they're two from that second
But
group.
notice in certain years you're going to be really competitive. Look at
Oh, yeah.
22, 21. They're almost on top of each other.
So what that tells me, Professor, is because there's three and maybe four of these 6 years where you'd have been okay. That tells me that if I'm drafting after the first 5 or 6 quarterbacks, so in other words, if I'm in a super flex and I'm picking 7th or 8th in that draft, and as expected, 6 quarterbacks are gone by the time they get to me at either 8, 9, 10, 11, or 12, I'm okay with punting the quarterback position for a few rounds. And remember, I had a team last year where I did exactly that. I waited on quarterback and I grabbed Stafford, Love, and Cousins from the 3rd to the 7th round, 7th or 8th rounds. I grabbed my quarterbacks all much later than usual, and I did great. But on those teams, I was drafting 10th, and I went wide receiver and running back heavy, and I didn't care that I had older guys, and I cleaned up. I beat the rest of the league on average by like 20 points a week. So this data
This is interesting.
really,
Now that you bring it like that,
yeah,
I'm looking at the
yeah,
distance. You have a lot more opportunities in quarterbacks to
yes.
maybe grab one, but looks like RBs, nah, you're getting what you think you're getting in
And, and here
WRs.
and here at the RB and the WRs, if you get, and I'll look at the population of these guys that are over that 100 and see where they fell in ADP.
Yes,
My
I'm
gut
ready
is,
for that data.
yeah, so I'm looking at that, and right now my first look at the data, which might change, but my first look at the data is telling me that they're out of that population of 11 at both RB and WR
Yep.
that are in that elite group, that
The
RB1
bottom
or
line. Yep.
WR1 group. There's about 9 or 10 every year that you would have gotten if all you did was go off of
Yep.
ADP.
And that's not
Just
surprising.
ADP. No, it's not surprising at all. The ADP, the consensus is pretty good
It is
at
pretty good. The public
picking
is
up
pretty
those top
good
guys. Yeah.
early. Yeah.
And here's the thing. If they're drafting a guy in the top 5 at a position and they probably only missed into that RB2 group, that 75 and above MVP. They're missing by one category. They're never missing by 2 categories. If they miss by more than 2 categories, it's because that player didn't even hit the charts because he was injured. That's the only way that they're
Yeah.
missing.
And if you look at the later ones, look at RBs. Almost the 50s and the 25s are almost on
Almost
top of each
identical.
other.
Yeah.
But look at the WRs. They're still separate. But
Yeah.
boy, the gap on both those positions from the 75 to the 50. I
And
understand
again,
we're calling it a 3. This data would almost say, 3.5.
and, and Professor, this shows why my better than zero strategy of making sure you had your 4 wide receivers
Because
earlier in the draft than most people are picking them is working. Because
well,
that,
you're not getting a lot of flex. You're not getting a lot of surprises. I think
no,
that's what this data
no.
is saying.
So if I've got all four of my wide receivers from those two populations, those first two populations,
Yeah.
and my competitors, especially if it's in a 3 wide receiver league where you're starting 3 every week, if I'm in those, the blue or the purple, I've got all my 4 wide receivers
That
that
you
I'm
need.
counting on every week. You know, my spot starters might be up in the other 2 categories, but my main starters
Yep.
are in that purple and blue population. I'm in much better shape.
And I will say this, notice the gap between the 75 and the 50-20. It gets really thin with RBs.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of shuffling, Dennis, and I think that probably is what you're talking about with your better than zero. Is
Yes.
somebody you're getting some of these cats that are stepping up later in the season with injuries and other things.
Yeah.
I think that versus in WRs probably not as much.
It's very stratified in wide
I,
receiver.
I I think that's what that's telling us.
Running back, it comes closer after those elite groups.
No, notice
And that
that.
and that fits my strategy, Professor, because my strategy is try to get 1 or 2 of the elite running backs,
Yep.
get yourself 4 of those wide receivers in the first 2 groups, and then draft a bunch of
Of RB.
running backs.
Because
And
you're cherry picking and you might get some good one. I bet if you look at the ADP in these populations, the green and the orange, Dennis, I bet you it's a lot of variation, maybe
yes,
even more than here with the WRs.
yeah, I think you're correct in that, Professor. And
So I
this is
think this is
fascinating data.
isn't this neat? See, you didn't even know this was coming. Surprise.
No, and here's the thing, folks. This is the first time I'm seeing this data. So
No,
I'm
yeah. I
reacting to the
I
data
I
just like a viewer is.
hide it from Dennis, and that makes me happy. So, and tight ends are definitely wacky, Dennis. Look at this. Just real. It's kind of like you either got them or you don't.
Yeah.
It's the elite or you don't.
Which
And
is which fits
what you
again
would predict.
the
Yes.
strategy because again better than zero. I was taking the best quality player early, even if it was a tight end. You know, I don't have any problem with taking the best tight end,
Mm-hmm.
the 12th pick in the first round.
Yep.
And this is why. And then after that,
Yeah.
you try to end up with one of the top running backs.
Yep.
You end up with 4 really good wide receivers. You try to take one of the top 4 or 5 quarterbacks. That's the core of a team that is going to have a better chance at winning
I
than the
mean, as I look
consensus
at your
ADP.
data, I'm going to be thinking, as you say, the better than zero. But I think I'm not sure if the tight end might be a little bit more.
Might have to weight them heavier.
Yeah, they may be more important than that because this blue being so close to the top. I'm wondering if you now last year you got burned if you did that strategy. You
Yes.
see, there's the treat. And I've actually got a whole bunch of lesson plans on my quarterback, and I could show you what this looks like ADP versus end of season. Dennis, I've got those some of those lessons already up. I'm telling you, your MVP is saying the same thing this other data is saying. Last year, you could have got burned if you didn't have Allen and Mahomes pretty much.
Yeah.
Hurts helped you, but boy, you could have got burned. But the previous years, you had a lot more flexibility. So I need to decide what year am I going to be in next year? Is 2024 like 2023, or is it like 2021 and two? I mean,
And
and
looking
yeah,
at the populations at the over 100, it's a rather smooth curve
it is.
that will probably
It could.
have a it'll
Have we
probably
reached the
bottom
bottom?
out. I
I
think
was
we've
about to
reached the
say.
bottom.
Then that means to me that we're going back up. That means they're going to get closer. That means you might delay your RB. your QB a little further. And historically, folks, I'll give you what I've found on the ADP. About round 6, you're getting extra risky there. So you definitely want some WRB. You probably want your tight end, given this data, and you want your QB definitely by round 6. So you need to figure out where those things happen this year. But uh, what Dennis's data is telling me is confirming how I've done my drafting, not having this data. So this is just adding the weight to that strategy that I've been doing. But to me, round 6 and later, it's getting risky for QBs. I remember Burrow was
Yeah,
one of those, and he was being drafted all over the place, and people were concerned. I was concerned. And if you waited that late and you were grabbing him, you might have got burned last year. And I can tell you this data 2023 says you probably did. You probably lost your league or were going, unless you had some stud WRs and RBs to carry you, you were probably in some trouble if you got in the 75 group versus the 100.
yeah,
So,
and here's one comparison that I'll make that I'm already thinking about and will be in an article here in the not too distant future. Is one thing that I've spotted in the MVP data is when guys go out there hurt and still play. We saw it with Matthew Stafford. He definitely was hurt the year before last.
yes.
He went out and he played. He tried to play through the injury and was not himself. And you saw a big dip in the data. Then he had a full off season to recuperate and get stronger. And what happened?
Boy,
Coming off the Super Bowl year, he had a shorter off season. So the following year, they didn't make the playoffs, and he had longer to rehab. Even a month longer to rehab is a big deal for a football player. And he was able to heal up. And remember, he hurt that elbow pretty late in the game.
yep.
In the 22 season, still played, right up here in during preseason, he hurt himself. And it just got progressively worse. He got rested, he got it tuned up, he was feeling better. Last year, he had a big blowout season where he was much, much improved. Last year, we had Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert, who were both trying to play through various injuries until they finally couldn't play anymore. That
Yep.
injuries added up. I look for big rebound seasons from both Herbert and Burrow this year.
Then you'll
Herbert,
probably get some ADP relief
and
then.
you're going to get ADP relief on both of them because
Yep.
you've also got a coaching change in Los Angeles Chargers. You got a coaching change with a more conservative coach who might keep Herbert's ADP from soaring when combined with his poor performance last year. Those might be the two bargains in drafts as we see that ADP data develop. And they should be in that over 100 MVP group this year. So we will see an uptick in that population. Plus, we've got Anthony Richardson, who will be back and healthy and could contribute to that over 100 group as well. So, and then CJ Stroud should threaten to hit that group. So we've got more contenders going up into that population than we do guys in that population that are expected to drop down. And remember, Mahomes wasn't part of that elite over 100 MVP group last year. So he might rejoin that group. So the quality at the top end of the quarterback group might increase from that small population last year. But we'll be forecasting all of that in the weeks ahead, Professor. Lots more great data studies that will be coming out. But oh my goodness, getting the treatment that I got from you, we will look at the effectiveness of MVP in drafting versus ADP. That'll be the next study we do. We can
I
look back at
definitely
the
want
last
that
couple of
ADP.
years.
Yep.
Yeah, we could look at the last couple of years and have an idea of how we did. And once we establish ADP for this year, we'll know exactly what the strategy should be. But
that's great.
Again, Professor, was not shocked to see the tight ends not live up to the other three positions when you look at the variability with the MVP index. We know we've got a different position here than the other positions, and it showed. That's one thing that we got confirmed in the MVP data, is that you have to treat your tight ends a little bit different.
True that. True that.
All right, folks, head on over to the scienceoffantasyfootball.com. Check out all of the great articles. Hey, the professor's got some great lesson plans for you over there. And you just never know what data will be added in the week ahead. But one thing you can count on, you can come on back here next week for another edition of the Science of Fantasy Football.
Get to work, folks.